Adrian, who's going to be speaking this evening about when personal becomes professional, one of my favorite topics. Originally from Ohio, Adrian now lives, works, and is pursuing his graduate degree in Baltimore, Maryland. As a strategic consultant and program officer with the Andy E. Casey Foundation, Adrian manages a portfolio of resources and programs for youth and young adults. Adrian is a dynamic change maker focused on improving permanency outcomes for older youth, stimulating youth and family engagement, and advancing positive and effective child welfare policy. We're so fortunate to have Adrian with us this evening, and I'll hand it over to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. Good evening, everyone. If you're able and willing and able to take yourself off to come on camera, it is awesome to see your beautiful faces. So for those of you I see even a couple of familiar faces. Pat O'Brien, I feel like I know you from You Gotta Believe. What's up, my good sir? I believe I saw Bethany as well, who I know from a long time in Ohio. And I do not know Mike and Lena, but I feel like I do now because you're all comfortable on your couch in this little cool setting. So welcome. Thank you for bringing me into your homes. Happy to talk to you tonight. I really am. When personal becomes professional, it's a very exciting topic for me to talk about, even though it is 8 o'clock in the evening. I have not eaten yet. So if I'm speaking fast, I will slow it down. Also, I am a huge believer in breaking all the rules. I know Betsy said to wait till the end to ask any questions. If you do have a question that is burning, please put it in the chat box or even come off mute. If this is indeed a conversation, then we can converse. I'm okay with that. So please do that. I want to talk about a few things tonight. When I was in school back in Ohio, I had a professor in one of my classes who said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, when you're speaking in front of an audience, tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them. So I'm going to give you the points that I'm going to make right now up front. If you want to jot them down, if you want me to send them to Betsy afterwards, I will be happy to do so. If you're taking notes on your little phone or iPhone or Android or whatever, then do that. But here's the point. There's the whole point of my conversation tonight, the entire point. We have to value lived experience just as much as we value work experience, education, and credentials. That is the whole point of my conversation tonight. We have to value lived experience just as much as we value work experience, education, and any other credentials. So that's the point. That's the whole message that I'm delivering. So if you want to log off now and go home and go to sleep, you can do that. Or you could indulge me and stick around for a few more minutes. And hello to the young sir with the bottle. Hello there. I see you hanging off the couch. And so valuing lived experience comes down to 3 points. And this is how I do it in my capacity here at the Andy E. Casey Foundation and also all of my consulting work. This is what I do at the table. The first thing I do is I start with the why. So that looks like challenging people at the table who I believe or that I see or experience is not looking at all aspects or perspectives of the particular situation. So I'm starting with the why, and that includes also challenging myself. And am I viewing it from the lens that I'm viewing it as a consultant, as a program officer, or as someone who has some type of emotional reaction to whatever the policy topic is of that day? And then the second thing that I do is I start with the who. Who is actually at the table, and then who else is not at the table. And when I am speaking and when I am advocating and when I'm dishing out resources, what does that look like for the people that it's going to impact? What does it look like for the people who look like me? What does it look like for the people who do not look like me? And then finally, I start with the how. Like, what is the ultimate goal? What are we trying to achieve? And more importantly, what are the unintended consequences? Because when you grow up in foster care, I do believe that most child welfare systems and the people that work in child welfare systems, I do believe that they have good intentions. That doesn't mean that there are unintended consequences because of those decisions and because of those policies. That's what I believe. Jackie, I'm going to say hello to you and ask, is your hand raised because you got a question, or you're giving me a high five because I'm speaking your language already? You let me know. All right.
That was a mistake. Sorry.
Quite all right, Jackie. All right. So tonight I'm going to have tonight I'm going to have a couple discussions with you. The first, I'm going to talk about my background a little bit. And more importantly than talking about my background itself, I'm going to tell you what I got out of that in terms of the professional development that I now use today in my capacity as a national consultant, but also in my capacity as a program officer with the Annie E. Casey Foundation. And then I'm going to talk about my professional journey. I did not plan to come work at the foundation. That just happened to happen. I did not plan to be even in the current role that I am in. That just happened to happen. For most folks who know me, my plan was to live out my days in Ohio and get heavily involved in Ohio politics and rise through the ranks. But thus, alas, here I am looking like a DJ with no DJing skills whatsoever, talking to you about my work at the foundation and my work across the country. So let me break my personal journey down into 2 segments. The first segment is my Georgia foster care experience, and the second segment is my experience in the Ohio child welfare system. And to kind of give you context, because this is important, Georgia is the South, Ohio is the Midwest. So right there are extremely different values in terms of how we believe in families and how we serve families. And when I entered the Georgia foster care system, I entered because my mom and father had gotten a divorce. They had a very abusive and toxic relationship in Florida. And so we relocated to the state of Georgia, where we were closer to my mom's family. And shortly after arriving in Georgia, it was discovered, well, not really discovered, it became more pronounced that my mother was either unwilling or unable, because there is a difference, unwilling or unable to take care of me and my 2 sisters. And I stress the word "and" because you could have 3 children and they could have 3 different personalities and 3 different behaviors, and it could go all to hell in a handbasket really fast, especially if you got the one child who is causing so much consternation. Alas, that is Adrian. And to give you a very small example of what I mean by that, I was enrolled up until that point, enrolled in 6 different preschools in the state of Florida before I came to Georgia. And I was in 6 different preschools due to behavioral challenges. I kept getting kicked out of preschool. And when I finally got enrolled in elementary school in the state of Georgia, I started school on a Monday, and by Friday I was expelled due to behavior. That's how much behavioral challenges I had in the state of Georgia. And what that was doing on the stress of the family was creating this issue that my mom was at her wit's end. And God bless her, she is still alive, she is still well, she's living in Ohio currently. What that is doing is, for someone who is not equipped to handle 3 children because they have their own issues in terms of substance abuse and all of her previous childhood experiences and trauma, now you add on that layer of she is now trying to raise 3 children. And one of those children has extremely challenging behavior. So my mom had a breakdown, and she decided that she didn't want me anymore, and decided that I needed to go into foster care. And so that's exactly what happened. And what happened is she decided to keep my 2 sisters and send me to a foster home, or she called the social services agency and said, I don't want him anymore. And when I encapsulate all of that in our conversation tonight, how does that translate to today as in this position? That right there was the trauma, that aspect of it. That's where the trauma and the adverse childhood experiences took place. Now, of course, I didn't know it then as a 6-year-old boy getting ready to go into foster care. I'm saying as a professional in the capacity that I sit in now, you can understand how young people who experience certain traumas like that, whether it be abuse, neglect, or anything like that, how that could possibly follow them for the rest of their lives. When you are 6 and you see that 2 of your siblings get to stay home with your mom and you don't, that could have some long-lasting effects and ramifications. And so I entered the Georgia foster care system and got placed, I will say, I got placed with a fantastic family. Even despite my challenging behaviors, I got placed with a great, great family. However, they were placed in the middle of nowhere, which I think was done on purpose. Now, the further away he is from the city, the better we can do. So they decided to put me out there on a farm with no other foster kids, with nothing but animals. And I'm pretty sure they thought that he can't take on the cows all by himself. So the best that he could do is try to get along with the foster mom and the foster dad. The foster mom was an educator. She was a teacher. and the foster dad was a construction worker and a farmer. And so I got the lenses of both those worlds. And my behaviors hadn't changed, though. I was still acting very erratic. I was still having all these challenging issues. And now you add on top of that the trauma that I've had of not being with my original family. It created a headache for this foster family. And I'll tell you what this foster family did, though. They didn't give up. They actually stuck it through. Now, in hindsight, I don't know if I could have. I don't know if I had the patience that the Lukes did. And luckily and happily and thankfully, I was able to go visit with them last year, was the most recent time that I saw them. They are still alive. They are in their 80s. Fantastic. They were older when I was placed with them. I went to a special behavioral school while I was in the state of Georgia, which is a very traumatic experience. And what I mean by special behavioral school, which kind of shaped the arc of how I believe in the school to prison pipeline, my thoughts in regards around policies surrounding juvenile justice and how we incarcerate, all that stuff is shaped from the fact that I went to a school where there were jail cells attached to every single classroom. So whenever a child was extremely disruptive or challenging, the teacher would press a button to call in some assistance, and they would come in and do physical restraints and take me out of the room and place me in this jail cell. And I could tell you vividly in terms of that. I could tell you what color the walls were. I could tell you what color the door was. I could tell you what color the floor was. I mean, that's how traumatic it was, even though with all those challenges. And the process in Georgia was I was with the foster home, and then my mom would feel away, or the child support checks from my father would stop going to her. So she would then come and take me out of foster care. And then when the checks started coming back in, she'd place me back in foster care. And so to give you an idea of how trauma works, as I grew up and became older, I was always under the impression that I had one continuous placement with the Lukes. It wasn't until I got access to my records that I realized that my brain, in order to cope with that trauma, processed it as one continuous placement, because it would have been too traumatic to understand that I was a kid who was getting placed with his mom and then given away, getting placed with his mom and then giving away. Eventually, that process had to stop. The courts was getting upset with her, like, look here, this is too much. We got to do something. There's got to be an adoption or a legal placement, permanency, whatever. And there was decided there was some kinship possibility in the state of Alabama where my grandmother, and unfortunately that kinship placement did not work out because she unfortunately passed away untimely in an accident en route to pick me up. And so that forced the father in the picture to come back in the picture, because it was his mom who passed away, to step in and say, I'll take all 3 kids now and we'll move to Las Vegas, which is what happened. And then we moved to Ohio after being with our father for a short time, because he was in the military and he received orders that he needed to go overseas. When he came back from overseas, it was discovered that he had a severe medical condition, which was brain cancer, and he unfortunately passed away my senior year of high school. So that's that part of it. And if it seems like that I am just talking about this as if it is just easy to do, like it doesn't bother me, that is not true. I do not want you to get that impression. That is part of the conversation of how you can tell your personal story in a professional setting and try to separate the aspect that what I am talking to you about is indeed my own trauma. And that the part of coping and part of dealing with that is learning to talk about it in this space, in this context, so that the message is received. I entered the Ohio foster care system, and I will tell you that's where I found out how undervalued I was as a 15-year-old Black teenager in a child welfare system. And on the flip side of that coin, how valued I was as the poster child for the Montgomery County Department of Job and Family Services, because of the skill sets that I was developing while in the Ohio child welfare system. So to give you a context, when you're a 15-year-old Black boy, particularly a 15-year-old Black boy in Ohio, nobody wants to adopt you. It is very rare. The statistics bear that out. So it is very hard to adopt teenagers. One, it is very hard to adopt Black teenagers. It is very hard to adopt Black teenage boys because of the stigma and the narrative that has been built that they are unruly, that they are aggressive, that they are all these things. And so I was unadoptable. That was the label that was placed on me in the Ohio child welfare system. But again, on the flip side of that conversation, I was also the poster child, because once I got connected with some caseworkers who said, I see some potential right there in Adrian. If we could just get him in some anger management, if we could put in these supports, if we could put in these resources, I think that there is something there. And so truth be told, that is where that is where a lot of my leadership development came from. It came from being in child welfare, from the school aspect of it, as well as what caseworkers individually did. That is where my advocacy chops came in at, in terms of learning to not only advocate for myself, but also advocate on behalf of my brothers and sisters in care. That is where I learned my love of politics, because I realized child welfare is a very political game. Even though there are people who have good and well-intentioned aspects of serving children and families, it is still politics, because it is politicians who decide family policy, particularly in this case, Ohio. And that is also where I built a lot of relationships with caseworkers and politicians and institutions, and the value of relationships. Because again, for the first half of my life, I had been shown and I had been treated that relationships weren't important and that I was not important. But once we got on the flip side of that, and I'm becoming older and I'm becoming a teenager, that obviously changed. It is also where I experienced the flip side again of that, of kinship care. In terms of, in Ohio, I also, at a very young age, I think I was about 19, 20, 21, maybe 20, don't quote me on the age, the importance of family and youth engagement, because I had to take custody of my niece and nephew to avoid them going into foster care. And that gave me a different insight to what kinship families go through when they are coming up against a child welfare system, trying to, one, help a family member out, and the dynamics of that relationship, and the dichotomy of the relationship that I had with my sister before the children were placed with me, the relationship while the children were placed with me, and then the relationship after, when the children went back home. That is a scary, treacherous road. And it's especially scary and treacherous when that situation pops up again, and you have to do a removal a second time. And so that's the personal aspect of it. And I'm watching the clock here. I got 10 minutes. So that's my personal journey. Came into the foster care system about the age of 6, stayed with a biological mom for a little bit, went to foster care with the Lukes, great family, taught me a lot of values in terms of taking care of family and just really awesome, unconditional, supportive, loving individuals. Went to stay with my father for a little bit, moved to Ohio. Father came back, got sick, passed away, came into the Ohio child welfare system, stayed with my biological mom again for a little bit, came back into child welfare, and aged out of the system at 18 and went off to college. So that's the personal part. Now let's transition to the professional journey. So after school, I started working for the Montgomery County Department of Job and Family Services. So now you have the former poster child of child welfare in Montgomery County, who's on all the billboards and all the magazines and doing all these wonderful things on behalf of child welfare. Yay. Let's now see if we can put him in a position with a program that we call Connecting the Dots, which is supposed to be these wraparound services for transition age youth and teenagers. And right there is where I realized the soft skills that we don't give our young adults in foster care, bumping up against their current foster care challenges. So as a coordinator in that program, I realized for the young people that I was supervising as youth workers, even though they wanted to go to work, and even though they wanted to do their best and have the best intentions of working, a lot of the stuff that they were dealing with at home impacted that, in terms of getting to work on time, in terms of maybe there was a fight the night before. Or in terms of them exploding at work because something triggered them that make them upset that they had dealt with previously while in foster care or with their homes. And so what I was seeing in that particular part of my professional experience is that the soft skills for young people in foster care was lagging extremely behind. And it was very, very sad, because these young people wanted to go out and earn a living and do what they wanted to do in terms of trying to progress in society. But that trauma of being in foster care and the challenges of being in foster kept bucking up against that system. And then I did some professional work at Wright State University, where I recognized when I first came to school, I was not going because I wanted to pursue my education. I went to school at Wright State because I wanted a place to live, because if you're aging out of the system at the age of 18, you need a place to stay, particularly if your previous foster home has other children at home, you can't stay there. And so I enrolled at Wright State because I wanted a dorm room. I didn't want to be homeless, essentially. And I didn't have a good enough job to afford an apartment on my own. And at Wright State, we started a program called the Independent Scholars Network because my case, along with some other young people from the Dayton area, recognized the value of wraparound services and also how to navigate complex institutions, because child welfare is an institution in itself, but also higher education at that time was not prepared or not aware that foster youth have their own unique challenges when it comes to trying to pursue higher education, which is why the statistics of young people coming from foster care going to college is so low. And getting the universities to understand a young person coming from foster care is not the same as a young person who has a 2-parent household or even a 1-parent household that takes their kids on trips or to college visits or fills out the FAFSA paperwork or has a place to go on weekends. All those things were eye-opening to a university when I told them, hey, we're about to go on break. I don't have anywhere to go. So do I stay in the dorm or what do you want me to do? Or, hey, this meal plan only covers us during the semester. I'm out of food by like the 4th week because I'm a food hoarder because I grew up in care and I don't want to go without food. So navigating the institution, or the trauma of if you have a roommate on campus and that roommate has parents who send them care packages and notes and cards and phone calls and said, hey, Justin, come home on the weekend and wash your clothes, or we're going to have Thanksgiving dinner here, blah, blah, blah. Young people in foster care, that can be re-traumatizing to them if they're moving on campus with 2 caseworkers in a white county van and they see all their peers moving on campus in their cars with their moms, dads, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. It's a whole different dynamic, and bringing that to the university's attention was the whole purpose of behind Independent Scholars Network, which subsequently other universities have certain parts and elements of it and do their own thing. And then I did Goodwill Easter Seals in Dayton, where I was an employment coach helping people with significant past traumas and challenges maintain employment. And I saw the barrier that employers had against people who had challenges and not giving them a second chance. And then finally, I came to Annie E. Casey Foundation. And I came to the Annie E. Casey Foundation as a national consultant with our child welfare strategy group. So basically, I came here to spread my wings and fly across the country and tell organizations and systems, hey, you should do this on behalf of foster youth, or you should do this because it's very important and that you should understand and love them and all that kind of stuff. And I thought that I was going to do that for 3 years and then go back home to Dayton and live out my days trying to run for office. And as my time was coming up, there was a position that became available because a coworker of mine was getting ready to move to Florida. And he said, Adrian, I think you'd be really good as a program officer. Have you thought about it? Nope. I'm doing my time here. I got stuff to do back in Dayton. I got to go run for mayor. I got to go be governor. Okay. Okay. Whatever you say, bro. What about just staying here in Baltimore and helping out? Nah, man, I got to go be the governor. Like, you don't understand. This is real. I've been dreaming this since I was a teenager. It's like, nah, bro, I think you really should stay here. Like, man, whatever. So I had an interview and conversations with my bosses. And he's like, yeah, actually, Adrian, we think you'd be a good position. So now I am in a position where I oversee a multi-million-dollar budget here in Baltimore City. And I use that to do all the things that I could have done also in politics, but I get to do it here in a great urban setting. I oversee all of our Boys and Men of Color initiatives here in Baltimore City for the Annie E. Casey Foundation in Baltimore. I oversee and implemented a new strategy for girls and women of color, all of our mentoring, because I believe mentoring is important. And then I also oversee all of our summer enrichment programs here in Baltimore City that the foundation funds. And all of that is used from the lens of I'm now a young Black program officer in philanthropy. And the reason why I stress that is because the tables that I sit at, people do not look like me. They are older individuals, mostly of the Caucasian persuasion. They are mostly come from these huge foundations like Weinberg and Able and Family League. And here is this young Black male in philanthropy now, responsible for issuing dollars and resources to these communities, mostly communities of color, because Baltimore is predominantly African-American. And that's the role that I play when it comes to personal and professional, that I get to sit in this capacity where I have enormous influence and I have enormous power. And also, I'd like to stress to you, even though I am from foster care, I have enormous privilege. And that is something that I recognize and I am conscious of when I'm at these tables, is because I recognize that there's a 15-year-old Black boy out there somewhere who has no idea that Adrian exists, but who is counting in some aspect on Adrian to have some type of program or to fund some program that could possibly change my life, in terms of whether it's a STEM program, whether it's a Baltimore 360 program in terms of dirt bikes, whether it's a mentoring program that I oversee, or whether it's a specific strategy that I'm trying to convince other funders to get behind to change the dynamics of young Black males here in Baltimore. And that's the way that I view my job. That's the way that I view my capacity. And I don't always go into every single meeting and say, hey, I'm Adrian McLemore. I grew up in foster care. That is not how those conversations go. The conversation is always on my role and my lens as a program officer. And if there is something that I see that there is an opening to insert, you know what? I have a little bit of personal experience in this aspect. Here's what young people think at that particular moment in time, because adolescent brain development is real and adolescent brain science is real. That's kind of the aspect that I view it from. And then last, before I get to your questions, is I am also a partner with an organization called the 220 Experience. And some of you may know the name Michael Sanders. Some of you also may know the name Jamal Callahan and Adrian McLemore. The three of us are three Black males in child welfare, where we go around and contract with systems to do partnering and consulting work in systems. And so that is the capacity of lens. And I do all of that, and truly, I do all that full time in terms of that aspect of it. I did great because I was expecting to go at 34 minutes because I'm OCD, and I did notice that I did that at like 26. So I'm going to pat myself on the back. There are questions that were submitted beforehand, so I'm going to start answering those. If you have a question, comment, concern, or complaint, if it's the latter two, send me a private email. Don't try to blast me on here publicly, because if you do, we're going to start off bad, and that's not good for any of us. If you have a question, or a comment, please come off mute or put it in the chat box. I'm happy to answer, but let me get to a couple of these questions that were submitted beforehand. The first question was, were you provided any resources while in foster care that enabled you to pursue the career that you're on? And the answer is absolutely yes. I would not be in the position that I am now if it were not for caseworkers. I had some specific caseworkers individually who actually fought tooth and nail to ensure that I was in certain leadership development programs, who made sure that I got to the airport, who made sure that they were in the cheering section when I had events, when they knew that other family was not going to show up. So yes, that was resources. And these caseworkers at the time were putting in so many requests for resources. And I don't know if this has changed, and I hope it does, because it's kind of embarrassing. But at one point, I was the most expensive kid to come out of Montgomery County. When you calculate the number of hours and the actual number of dollars that was spent on everything that these caseworkers were trying to get to do. I think part of it was personal development for me that these individual caseworkers have, but I'm also going to be honest with you and frank with you that part of it was politics. If you got the nice speaking foster poster child, it makes your system look better too. So there was a dual aspect of it. And those are things that I was learning as a teenager. So those are skill sets that I now employ in my professional capacity that I was learning at a very young age, which is you almost can't teach that in a classroom setting. That is pretty much done through on-the-job training, so to speak. Another question was, what are some of the things that you like to see change about the child welfare system? The easy answer is no child welfare system to begin with. That's the easy answer. But the answer is family, youth, and engagement. And the removal of stigmas that families are inherently bad and need to be fixed. So we recognize that there is some sort of child welfare system that will always exist in some capacity, because there are young people who are going to be abused and neglected by their original caretakers. I recognize that. I understand that. When they come in contact with the system, though, when they come in contact with whatever the local jurisdiction is, how are we viewing that family, though? Are we viewing them inherently as evil and bad, or are we inherently viewing them as a family that has some challenges and deficits that, if given the right resources and the right supports, they are capable of taking care of their families? That is not always the case, which means then how are we framing these young people and matching them with the best possible adoptive family who is going to love them unconditionally for the rest of their lives? Let me answer a couple of questions in the chat before I go back to the other ones as well, just so that people don't think that I'm ignoring you, because I'm not. My good sir, Pat, have you considered getting involved in local politics while you're living in Baltimore? The easy answer to that is when the stigma of corruption leaves the city, yes, Pat. So I used to work for a former mayor here when I did an internship. She is now in prison. So I am trying to determine if I was the reason that she went to prison or if she went to prison on her own. And so until that sort of dies down, I don't want to be associated right now with that aspect. So that's the answer to your question, Pat. Did I have a guardian ad litem while you were in foster care? I think I did. The question that you probably should be asking is, have I ever met them, or had they ever met me or had any conversations? And the answer to that would be no. While I was in child welfare in Ohio, I did not have one meeting with a GAL or a CASA, not one. And I never went to court. All of the conversations and transactions took place through caseworkers who came to the house. While I was in the state of Georgia, to be honest with you, I was very, very young, so I don't remember. I am pretty sure that there was a CASA or a GAL. According to the records that I do have access to, there was people advocating one way or the other about what should happen to me. But in terms of people actually sitting down with Adrian in his living room or wherever living room I was living in, the answer on that is no. What advice would you give to foster parents? I typically have a policy of not answering a question with a question, but let me go ahead and break that policy because I believe in breaking rules as well. The question isn't what advice would I give you? The question is, what would it take for you to be successful with this child? That's the conversation. A lot of times foster parents say no to teens and young adults because they believe they cannot be successful. And that with that particular individual, because we look at their deficits first, we look at their challenges first, we look at the circumstances of how they were brought into the system first. When truth be told, we should be looking at it from an asset framing lens. And asset framing says that no matter the challenges and deficits that this young person has, or that this family has, or whatever the case, this person has some inherent values and contributions already at the table. That is the essence of that. So the question is, what does it take for me to be successful with this child? And recognizing that all behavior has meaning. So a lot of times we get hung up on they are AWOLing, they are running away, they are abusive, they are hitting, they are acting out in some sort of sexual manner, all of these things. When it comes to teenagers, because their brain is not fully developed and because they have not developed the skill sets to communicate effectively how they feel, all of their communication is through behavior. And so it is understanding what that behavior is and then understanding the why behind that behavior. So then you can address the root cause of what is causing behavior. And that is a very hard thing to do. I'm going to say that to you. It's very, very hard because in the moment, the behavior is what's causing all the consternation and the issues. And so you're only focusing on the behavior, not focusing on the why behind the behavior. And so what I always tell foster parents in most settings and at the tables when I do trainings is the number one thing to be successful as a foster parent is to first, and this is going to take you a lot of prayer, a lot of therapy, a lot of something, maybe even a lot of drinks, is to, one, not become offended by the behavior. When you become offended by the behavior, you respond very, very differently. When you become offended by the behavior, you take it very, very personally. And please understand that these foster youth do not hate you. They don't know you. So they can't hate you. They don't know you. They are expressing and acting out of behaviors because of everything that they're going through. Again, that's not an excuse. That doesn't mean that you should let them go around busting out all your windows and trying to dissect your dog for some science experiment. That's not what I'm saying. I am simply saying that there is meaning to the behavior, and understanding the why behind that behavior is very, very important. Kids bounce from foster home to foster home on purpose because of something they may not like where they are living. My heart goes out to them. So that's some auxiliary comments. What are we doing wrong as foster parents? And the reason why I added that whole context, because I want to answer it this way. Here's my answer. Who said you were doing anything wrong? What can you do differently? Again, it's all about how can you see yourself being successful with this young person? If you think that you're doing wrong, you're doing something wrong because you're thinking that you are. It is about understanding the child's behavior and then understanding what you can do differently to meet that child's specific needs. So don't think that you're doing anything wrong as a foster parent. Think about what are you doing right? What can you do differently and hopefully get some change behaviors. Let me jump to the chat real quick. Do you think you should go to their court hearings, pros and cons? Oh, Betsy, that's a tough question. Let me come back to it because I don't have a good enough response right now. Let me come back to it. Let me sit on it so I can sound all educated and stuff. Actually, let me give you an answer. It depends. It's a case-by-case thing. I really do think it depends on the maturity of the young person. I do believe it depends on the circumstances, on how serious the case is. I believe that it depends on if it's going to be extremely traumatic for that young person to go to their court hearings, depending on what circumstances are discussed at that court hearing as it relates to, why they're in care or why that. So it is pros and cons. I do believe the best thing that we can do is to be as transparent as possible with young people who are able. Now, there's a section of young people that I haven't talked about because that is for professional doctors and therapists and everything. There are going to be youth who are going to be extremely dependent on child welfare. Those are our medically fragile youth. Those are our youth who have been extremely abused in terms of physically abused or sexually abused, or have some type of other differently challenge, differently abled. And that means that the system has to be as compassionate as possible, and that guardian ad litem and CASAs have to be as empathetic as possible to making sure that that child's needs are being met, because that child may not have a voice, literally and figuratively, in terms of trying to communicate what their needs are. At age 18, what was your concept of aging out, and what did that mean, and what was it going to mean that on your birthday? And so I wrote down to my answer to that question it goes back to a Home Alone quote. This is it. Don't get scared now. That's literally what I come up with when Macaulay Culkin said that when he was home alone. When you are on the cliff of child welfare, and that hasn't changed since I've been in the system, and it hasn't changed now because I'm still heavily involved and I still train youth and I still talk to young people on a regular basis. And in fact, I have a training next week with a bunch of teenagers. The feeling is still the same. It is an unknown world. And because I have been unprepared for this unknown world, I am terrified, but I have to act like that I'm not, because I'm an adult now, because the system said at 18 that I'm adult and that I can function as myself. So most of them try to navigate that new terrain by themselves, and they fall off a cliff at some point. It is inevitable. It is very rare, extremely rare, that a young person leaves the system and all of a sudden propels to the high arcs and echelons of society. Young people will cope with their foster care experience for the rest of their lives. And what I mean cope, that mean that mean they're going to be depressed or bogged down by it. What I mean is that foster care experience will never leave them, because that is a part of their identity. And what we do traditionally, we have tried to medicate it away. We have tried to put them in therapy to make it go away. We have never given them the tools to say, this is going to be a lifelong healing process for you. So what coping skills can we put in place for you, Adrian, put in place for you, Jackie, put in place for you, Cynthia, to help you deal with that when those triggers come up in society? And you never know when they're going to hit. You could be watching a movie and see two parents loving their child unconditionally and think back, why didn't I have that as a kid? You could be out in public walking down the street and see a grandpa having ice cream with their grandchild. It's like, dang, I wish I had grandparents. Like, you just never know. So what do we do in terms of coping to help these young people and say, hey, this is really, really crappy what happened to you. It really is. How do we help you cope through that? And it's going to look different for each individual young person. So there isn't a blanket slate. And then last question that was submitted beforehand: have people ever used the fact that you have a personal experience with your work as a way of discrediting you or undermining your expertise, advice, or ideas? If so, how did you handle it or think about it? And so my initial sarcastic response to this question was, who said that? And put their names in the chat, because if anyone's discrediting what I said or what I experienced, let me know so that we can go toe to toe. All kidding aside, interesting enough, there was an incident that this actually happened, but it was unbeknownst to me. And this actually happened at the Annie E. Casey Foundation. And this was before I was an employee on staff. And so what happened was I was brought in to speak to the board of directors about my foster care experience and how I would change the child welfare system. It was the typical dog and pony show. Here comes the former foster youth, the former poster child. He's going to come in. He speaks well. He articulates well. He's going to give a speech and some questions, and he's going to go home. So we're sitting at the dining room table, because it was a board function a number of years ago, eating food, just having casual conversations. I kid you not, I didn't think anything other than that. It's just another speaking engagement that I had to do. I get on my plane. I fly back home to Ohio, go back to my regular 9-to-5 job. Didn't think anything else about it. Well, apparently at this function of me speaking to the Annie E. Casey board, there was a board member who said something to another board member. And in essence, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know what was said why it was said, but in essence, it was discrediting my story and my remarks for whatever reason. It compelled that board member enough to defend me that they said something to our previous president and CEO of the foundation, and he called me personally to apologize. And I still to this day will tell you exactly what I told him. I have no idea what you're talking about. Have no idea what the person even said. That's just how it didn't affect me or didn't faze me. I didn't file it away and say, oh my God, he said something that, made me feel terrible. I didn't even remember the conversation or what I said at the table. And he just kept apologizing profusely because he wanted me to know that my story had value, that my lived experience had value. And he wanted me to know that that particular board member was not speaking on behalf of the entire NAE Casey Foundation or behalf on the entire board. And the bit of irony now, full circle, because I am sarcastic, is now I work for that very foundation. Ooh. So whoever that guy is, if you're on this call, whatever, forget you. That's all the all the questions that were submitted beforehand. I don't know. There's one more question. And so if you have another question, put in the chat box. What do you believe are the pros and cons of involvement in politics in the child welfare system? Any proposed solutions to the cons? Any way to leverage the pros? Whew. I will tell you, as I was telling Betsy when we were talking offline before this call started, politics involves a lot of scrutiny. I am at a place in my life where I've always been this way. I'm very comfortable with talking about my story, and I'm very comfortable with how I relay that information to you. I'm very comfortable with how I relay the dark parts of my story to you, and recognize that I am not perfect. I screw up every single day, and I am by no means will ever be perfect. But politics is a profession where voters and the general public expect their politicians to be perfect in an imperfect society. So when all these scandals and issues come out, it is very eye-opening for me, realizing I come from a crazy, crazy background and just child welfare in general. So it makes for a great story. It makes for a great headline. But if you do the deep dive, there's a lot of dark stuff in there. There's a ton of darkness and depression and a whole bunch of other stuff of just being a human. And I don't know if politics is truly ready for that honest transparency, because in politics, you got to kind of fluff it. You got to tell a story that makes it more palatable and digestible for people to receive it. And so as much as I love politics and I will stay involved in politics, I get more and more comfortable with not running for office, because for me, it's okay. But I have a family and I don't know if they can handle it. Like I said, I got 2 sisters. I got a wife and I got a kid. It is very, very difficult for me to think about what they would be subjected to because I wanted to seek office, in terms of all the stuff that comes out just by the natural curiosity of people who want to know information about you. So that's the answer to my question. I don't know if I really answered your question, but I will say as a politician, I did a good job because I answered it without answering it. So maybe I should run for office. Betsy, I'm done. And I need to take a drink of water. So I'm going to pause and see if there's anything else that people want to ask so I can take a swig because my mouth is dry.
Well, feel free to put questions in chat if you want. We still have 10 or 15 minutes. One question I was thinking about, Adrian, is you talked a little bit about your behavior when you were young. And it sounds like when you first went into foster care, you were pretty challenging. And so as you reflect back on that period, what were some of the turning points, or, how did you turn out okay?
That's always a good question. How did you turn out okay? First, the answer is that who says I'm okay? And who says that I'm okay? And what is the definition of being okay? But in all seriousness, what happens when it comes to change behavior, one, I think the Lukes did a phenomenal job of loving me unconditionally. So what that showed me, even unbeknownst to me, I didn't learn this till I was older. What that showed me was that no matter how bad I was and how bad and how good I was at trying to make them mad to get rid of me, because that's what foster kids do, this stubborn old couple would not let go. I'm like, God dang, I have done everything. Get rid of me. They wouldn't do it. And that was, as a kid, that was ticking me off to high hell, because I'm like, look, I'm pulling out all the stops. I am out here chasing people with knives. I'm out here saying, I'm going to kill you in your sleep. I'm out here pulling out all the one-liners. And they was like, we love you. You what? Did you hear what I just said I was going to do to you? We love you. Come here. Give me a hug. Okay. All right. Whatever, lady. She's more crazy than I am when you think about it now. But as I was getting older and I was still having these anger issues and these behavioral challenges, there was one particular caseworker who said, Adrian, you have all the potential in the world if you just learn to calm down. And it took that sort of come to Jesus moment because I actually trusted her and valued her and loved her dearly. Fantastic caseworker. She's come to all my graduations. I mean, she has been there the entire time. She's just one of a couple of caseworkers. And when she said that, it hit me. It was like, all right, she's telling me that if I change my approach, I could actually get more of what I'm wanting versus less. All right, lady, let's try your way and see if it works. And voila, it happened. And this is kind of what has manifested from that. The other thing is it takes a team and web of support. So I have what I call my cabinet of mentors. I have a ton of people who I rely on from advice. And everyone that is a mentor of mine understands how difficult I am to be a mentee too, because my approach is, you are my mentor, which means I want this specific thing from you. But keep in mind, I'm not always going to do what you're telling me. You are my advisors. You're going to give me the best information possible, and then I'm going to make my own decision. And some people can't handle that, even as adult supporters to young people. When a young person is clearly articulating, this is specifically what I need from you, please keep in mind, I may not do specifically what you ask, but I value your input. And that is tough for people to process. So luckily, these cabinet of mentors have done really well. And I've only fired them like every other day, all the time, because they tell me stuff that I don't want to hear. So that's that aspect of it. My behavior also changed over time due to growth and development in terms of that aspect of it. Again, being fully transparent with you, Betsy, and everyone else, I still have a major anger issue. I still have a major dark side. I have incredible trauma that it still exists in me. I would be lying to you if I said that I didn't. I would be lying to you if I said that I still don't get angry. I would be lying to you to still say that I cannot explode at any moment. It is trying to be conscious enough that if this will be a lifelong journey and a lifelong process, and I will never be okay as the person has said. I can cope, and coping is okay as well. That's another version of okay. And to not stigmatize a person when they say, I'm going to be angry for the rest of my life. It doesn't mean I have to act on anger, but just know that I'm going to be angry and frustrated about for the rest of my life. And that's okay. Like that part has to be okay as well. Did I ever think about being a social worker? No, because I don't have the patience. No, I've never thought about being a social worker. I've always thought about being a politician. But in some ways I am a social worker in a different form, because I'm always thinking about the social impact of the decisions that I make from the office that I make them from now. I never thought, truth be told, and I think about this in retrospect all the time, I never thought that I would be in control of this amount of money and using it to help people in that aspect. Like, I actually have the authority and the ability to say, I'm going to give this specific program funding to serve this specific need, this specific population, or I'm responsible for developing a strategy, or I'm responsible for getting other funders to pitch in to serve this. And that is a nice feeling to have in terms of getting my fulfillment from that aspect of it. But I also think of it in the context of that is extreme responsibility, because I am always thinking about the young people. As I was telling Betsy again before the call, I'm constantly thinking about the homeless people who live a block away from me under my expressway. The tons of people who have pitched up a tent there, because I'm consciously always thinking about, what if I was in their shoes? I will always be empathetic to other people. That is part of my humanity. And part of that is because I was treated so inhumanely growing up. So when you're treated a certain way a lot of your life, what you try to do is you try to do the exact opposite. And that's where all my humanity and empathy comes from. What do you believe is the single most effective part of child welfare system, or single thing individual caseworkers can do for the children? To be an unconditional supporter. That is it. To be an unconditional supporter. And unconditional doesn't mean that you accept all the behaviors that the young people display. Doesn't mean that you accept all of those things. But what it does is, one of the factors of your ability to manage their caseload is that you will see their value, that you will see their humanity, that you will see their attributes, that you will see their contributions to society. Not only just as a person, but just in general, as a young person that you've come in contact with in child welfare. And that is very, very hard to do as a caseworker when you have 30 kids, when you have 30 cases, when you also have supervisory meetings and CFT meetings and trying to preserve a placement, or you have to drop a kid off at the shelter or take it to the hospital. Like, that is very, very hard to do. but it's a consciousness and a mindset that you have to do in order to do that. Betsy, remember I told you that people can ask me anything? And then I look at this next question. Did you see this question? How did you meet your wife and how did she gain your trust? I don't know if my wife trusts me, truth be told. But I met her in Dayton, my hometown. And we actually went to the same high school. She didn't like me in high school. She thought I was a nerd and a geek. Jokes on her. She's married now. And I was a student leader. I was a student politician. So we met unofficially then. We came back around after an incident because her mom was actually my English high school teacher. My niece was in a car accident. She was hit by an ice cream truck, or no, she wasn't hit by an ice cream truck. She was hit by something. She was hit by some type of vehicle a number of years ago. And my wife has a daughter who is now my daughter. They became friends, and they came down as my niece was recovering and getting well from her leg surgery and stuff like that. And then we started talking, and then we went to see the movie The Butler. And our first date was an argument. Because she wouldn't let me buy her snacks. And I was upset about that. She wouldn't let me buy her snacks. And we've been arguing ever since. Do you find having your own child in the context of your own family is therapeutic for you as you give your child the love in a family that you did not get? That is extremely difficult, because I will tell you the circumstances of my family. This is my family. This is my wife and my kid. It is very difficult because my wife came into our relationship with our daughter from a previous marriage. And so I was not there for the first few years of my daughter's life. But you cannot tell my daughter, and you can't tell anybody, that she has not been mine. I just told her I just happened to miss her birth. And I apologize to her all the time that I just wasn't there when she was born. After seeing 7 births from my 2 sisters, I couldn't take one more. That's the reason that I give her. And so I do find that I try to make sure that I see my daughter as she is and not what I want her to be. And I try to see my daughter and let her and be in her world, which is something that I did not experience, is what I think what a lot of kids don't experience. And that is the ability to be seen, valued, and heard in the context of your own world. So her world currently is anime. It is currently Marvel. It is currently drawing. It is currently hating school. It is currently, I don't like you because I am a teenager. All those things, but that is her world, and I exist in that world. And sometimes I say, this is exactly what you're doing, and she thinks it's extremely creepy that I know her so well, but it's intentional to know her because I feel seen in the sense of, this is what I would have wanted as I was growing up. Does it make it extremely difficult and challenging? Absolutely, because then I process, how would I have turned out if I had a stable placement, if I had an adoption, if I had 2 parents, if my mom got the help that she needed, if my dad didn't die? So you're right. It circles this whole thing back to that trauma is always going to be there, because you're always going to be reminded of what you have and also what you don't have. So.
Any last questions for Adrian? Okay. Well, thank you, Adrian. This was really great. I think you get the award for the most words per hour spoken. So, I don't think we've had another speaker that spoke quite as quickly. So,
I can't put y'all to sleep at 8 o'clock at night. If I was up here monotone and just spoke very slowly, y'all be like, get this brother out of here. I ain't doing this.
Really
Shout out to Bethany. I haven't seen Bethany in years except for on social media. Bethany, just know that I see your face. I love you and I miss you. Don't think I was going to get away from that.
Oh, well, thank you. We miss you in Ohio. I kind of lost track of time. I knew that it was temporary, and I guess I didn't realize that you were permanent or semi-permanent out of state now. So, but hopefully we'll win you back sooner or later.
Yeah. People continue to recruit me to come back to Ohio. I miss Ohio. I love Ohio. I absolutely do. There is always an itch to come back home to the Midwest. But we'll see what happens here. I'm doing really good work here, and I still get to do work nationally. So
yeah,
we're in a good spot right now.
That's exciting. Okay, well, I'm going to close us out. So thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you especially Adrian for sharing so much. As many of you know, Adoption Network Cleveland is a nonprofit organization. We serve individuals and families impacted by adoption, kinship, and foster care. We're extremely excited to be partnering with experts in our national, state, and local community to offer this Monday evening speaker series that we've been doing now for a little over a year, or just about a year, actually. I think we started at the very beginning of April last year. In addition to this series, we have multiple opportunities for support, education, and advocacy. You can see those at the link that I put in the chat box. And to find out more about our organization or to support our work, you can visit our website, which is adoptionnetwork.org. We are a membership organization, and we hope that you'll consider joining us as a member. Please join us as the series continues. As I said earlier, the next session is Monday, April 12th, and we host Ron Neidham discussing Adoptee Romantic Radar. We also have several other offerings that you can check out on the calendar as they're added. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Adrian.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank everybody.